All right, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah, and I am one of IPC's Program and Outreach Coordinators for Montgomery, Frederick, and Prince George's County. And we also have Anna Owimbo and Rebecca, who is our wonderful administrative and tech assistant tonight. We're so thrilled that you all are here sharing this time with us. But before we get started, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge this land and these waters that were stewarded by many who came before. And as we gather here today, we wish to hold space for silent reflection on and gratitude for the land upon which we live and the local waters that support and nourish us all. We recognize that this land and these waters were stewarded by many who came before. The original people believe they belong to these lands and waters and not the other way around. Their spirituality and identity were place-based. The stories these indigenous people, plants, animals, lands, and rivers witnessed are filled with environmental, social, and climate changes, interwoven with stories of many struggles, injustices, and resilience. And please join me silent in this prayer of commitment. We are gathered here as people of faith in response to the calling of our hearts to come alongside the original stewards of this land and these waters that sustain us all. We seek to change the narrative of this story towards one of harmony with the gifts of creation and all living beings. May we act upon this calling in a way that helps us all, not only to heal the wounds of nature, but the wounds of our common story and living communities as well. Thank you for taking that reflective moment with me. Now we can dive into the topic that brought us all here together, our interests. And you will see this is actually a slide that's going to go over some of our funders for this program. We are very proud partners with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay and KC Trees. We work with congregations across the Bay region to help increase the tree canopy, reduce stormwater runoff, reduce impacts from flooding, and add beauty to their grounds. This project aims to address several challenges, including improving air and water quality, as well as urban heat island effects. And here tonight, we have two exceptional arborists who are passionate about trees and this work. First is Zach Carnegie. He's a forest projects coordinator with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. And more information is going to follow on the next slide. Let's take a little bit of a deeper look at Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. And here you can clearly see the vision and mission is to restore our shared watershed through partnerships to improve our lands and waters. Next, we're very happy to welcome Gabby Elliott. And she is an urban forester with KC Trees. She started after earning a Master's of Science in Forest Resources and Conservation from the University of Florida. And her knowledge and experience with both rural and urban forests makes her an incredible asset to the organization. She has provided many of the site plans for the congregations in the metro region, supporting KC Trees' mission, which is to restore and protect the tree canopy of the nation's capital, as you see on the next slide. And so now I will hand it off to our experts, and they're going to walk through tree care and really get into the weeds of every season. So thank you, and please welcome Zach and Gabby.
Thank you, Sarah. Still seeing the, whoops.
Just bear.
Sorry, Zach, just a moment. I will share again.
Good to get these things out of the way early, right? It wouldn't be a webinar if we didn't have technical.
Oh my goodness. Okay, there we are. Let's go to the next slide.
All right. So thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah, and thank you everyone for being here. I hope everybody's having a good evening. I'm going to go ahead and start kicking it off with something we all are probably doing right now or dreading doing, which is some spring cleaning. So some of you might be members of congregations who've already participated in some plantings through the Trees for Sacred Places. So it's a really good time to think about what you might need to do this time of year. So some of the things we're looking for in the spring, we're going to come back and maybe break up and rake back some of the old mulch that's placed around our trees. If we don't have mulch in place already, maybe these are existing trees, it's a really good time of year to go out and put the mulch down. I know some of you may have gardens or flower beds, and that takes up a lot of time already. But it's relatively quick, I find, to add mulch to your tree, and it can go a long way. So, this time of year, we've had a whole winter pass by us. It's good to get out, rake back our mulch, and by that I mean pull it back from the base of our tree, and maybe break it up a little bit. Some of the mulch, especially hardwood, tends to kind of form a thatch, which almost becomes a little bit water repellent. So get in there, kind of break it up, pull it away from the base of the tree, and we'll talk a bit about that in a minute. What we're going to do as we pull that back is inspect the base of the tree for encircling roots. You can see the image here on the left. Maybe that had soil pushed up against the base of that tree around the root collar. Maybe it was mulch, and that encouraged the growth of a root that actually is working its way around the base of the tree. We also address this during planting, but this can occur when too much mulch has been applied. We want to address this early on, so that's why we'd like to inspect for this every year or every couple years, because it's easier to get in there and maybe prune off that encircling root before it gets too big and before it starts to constrict the lateral growth of our trees over years. It's another good time to replace and straighten our broken deer protection or stakes. Maybe we've got stakes that are holding up our trees with guy lines. Maybe it's stakes holding up caging that's protecting our trees, and we'll talk more about that in the fall section. It's a good opportunity to get out here, replace those things, straighten them up, replace the deer protection. And then also monitoring our branches for bud swell as well as leafing out. I've got a tulip poplar in my backyard. It looks like the entire canopy is healthy, at least as so far this time of year, because every single one of those buds, the cuticles peeled back. They're swollen, they're going to break bud and leaf out any week now, any day now almost. So I feel pretty good, right? I can see that every branch is looking pretty healthy. Maybe this time of year you see some branches, the buds never really developed. Maybe they aren't swelling and it doesn't leaf out here into the spring. Then you might have an issue. That branch may have died back and might need to be addressed, might need to be pruned. I believe you can go on to the next slide. So I talked a bit about mulching already. Mulch is really important, especially for our young trees. It helps do a couple different things. So one, it provides a little bit of thermal regulation for our young trees as they're going through that transplant shock. They've been grown, they've either in a container or in the ground, they've been dug up and they've been transplanted. So it's going to have to grow new roots, and that layer of mulch provides some thermal protection, which helps against the sharp temperature swings we get during certain times of year. It also helps retain moisture within the soil, which is again really important because our trees need to absorb that moisture to grow. It also helps keep weeds at bay, competing vegetation. So if we can create a ring of mulch, then there's less competition for that soil moisture, especially in our young trees that are still developing the root system trying to establish. What we don't want to do is what we see in this image here, which is a giant, some people call it a mulch volcano. Having lived in Hawaii, I always think of volcanoes as having a crater. So I just refer to this. We don't want a giant mound of mulch pushed up against the base of our tree, especially our young trees. This traps moisture against that bark. It can allow it to rot or introduce, conditions that allow fungus to grow. That's where I kept mentioning we want to kind of keep it pulled back. We'll see an image, I think, after this one, but I do want to mention, use some kind of a natural mulch. It can be wood chips, it can be shredded hardwood, pine bark. There's quite a few out there. I recommend using a trusted landscape supplier. If you're going to buy your own mulch, you could also go to your local hardware stores and find them in bags. If you want to use wood chips, maybe a tree came down, a limb came down, you've had it chipped up on your property, it's good to give it maybe a whole year to kind of season, dry out, just in case there's some kind of fungus or other pathogen that could attack young trees. We want to make sure we don't take freshly chipped wood and throw it right around the base of our other trees. So give it a year to season. Next slide, please. So this is what we want our mulch to look like. We kind of use the 3-3-3 method, if you can remember that. And it's a pretty loose but general guideline. So about 3 foot in diameter, with 3 inches of space around the base of our tree, no matter how big that diameter of the tree is, kind of pull that mulch back, give about 3 inches of room. And then we make a layer about 3 inches thick. When we look back at that mound, one of the other reasons it's bad is it's so dense, it's going to be preventing, gas exchange, which is really important for our roots to be healthy. You can basically suffocate the roots if you put too thick of a layer on. So 3-foot diameter, 3 inches space around the base of your tree, and about 3 inches thick. And that's a pretty good rule of thumb. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Gabby to start talking about summer tree care.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. That was awesome. I feel like that's a hard act to follow. That was all very clear and concise, but I'm going to do my best. So summer tree care, especially for these young trees, is so vital. Young trees need a lot of attention all the time, but especially in the summertime because it's hot, especially where we are, right? It's hot and we're in an urban environment. So the trees need all the support they can get. And the main thing we have to do to support them well is water them. So watering your trees in the summertime is the most beneficial thing you can do for them, especially these young trees. So just as Zach was saying, they've been transplanted. It's a huge trauma for them, and we need to allow their roots to establish in their new environment. The best way to do that is to water them. So that said, we want to make sure we're watering them the correct amount. So just, like anything else in life, you can have too much of a good thing. So you don't want to overwater, but then that of course raises the question, well, how much do I need to water these trees? We can go to the next slide. So we like to use the mnemonic 25 to stay alive. So that's what you can remember, 25 gallons a week for young trees during the growing season. So now through the fall, when the trees start to drop their leaves, that's the growing season, right? So we want to make sure that they're getting 25 gallons of water per week. And that 25 gallons is about 3 to maybe 5 minutes with your garden hose, depending on your water pressure. Normally it's closer to like 3 minutes. So it's about 3 minutes continuously with your garden hose. And that's if, during that week, it doesn't rain at all, right? That's how much you need to water your trees. But if it does rain, of course, if Mother Nature does some of that watering for you, then you don't have to water your tree quite that much, right? To get 25 gallons, you need less water than that if it already rained. So one thing that I love about our website at kctrees.org, you can sign up for watering alerts, and it'll kind of tell you if we've had a super dry week and you need to water your trees, or if there's been a lot of rain and maybe the trees don't need as much attention from us during that week. We can also send you a free rain gauge. And what that does is, it's like a little tube, and you set it up somewhere outside, and it measures the water that comes down over the course of the week, and then eventually it evaporates away. So it helps you know how much it's rained. So the rain gauge might tell you 25 gallons is equivalent to about an inch and a half of water. So it might tell you, okay, it rained 1/4 of an inch this week. So then you can kind of subtract that from how much you have to water. So it's a really handy little tool. And the watering alerts are super handy because it's right there on your phone. Just says, oh, you need to water your tree. There you go. Now you know. So when you're watering, you also want to make sure, just as Zach pointed out, the mulching is really important for your trees. So when you water, you want to kind of make sure that you're not blasting the mulch all over the place, or burrowing down into the mulch with the stream of the water. If it's really high pressure, right, that can happen. We don't want that to happen because we want the mulch to stay there. So watering with like a nice, one of those shower attachments on the hose or something like that to give the water a nice spread out feeling, that'll be the most beneficial way to water for your trees. And we can go to the next slide. All right, so another probably pretty obvious to most people, I bet a lot of people would guess this one. Another important task for summer tree care is weeding. And with young trees, so a big part of this, a big part of making sure weeds don't encroach on your trees is exactly what Zach was talking about in the spring. If you put down a good layer of mulch around that tree using that 3-3-3 rule, it's going to suppress a lot of the weeds right from the start. So you won't really have to worry about weeding during the summer if you've already got that nice, beautiful mulch layer there. It's going to keep the weeds at bay. But if you think about trees in the forest, right, we don't usually in a healthy forest see a lot of grass or too much kind of super green ground cover, right? And that's because the trees compete for resources with every other plant. So if you're watering your trees in the summer and they're surrounded by a whole bunch of turf grass all the way right up to the trunk, a lot of that water that you're putting down is going to go to the grass as opposed to the tree. So we want to make sure that mulch is there to allow the tree to get most of that water when we water the tree, but it also helps suppress the weeds. So some weeds are a lot more dangerous to trees, especially young trees, than others. Vines particularly can be really, really threatening and detrimental. Even, I'm sure everybody here has seen along the highways, when you're driving down the highway, you see kind of those huge mature trees with vines all the way up, going all the way up the trunk and sometimes even covering the trees. So vines can be really threatening to even mature trees, but young trees, they can grow up over them really quickly and they can topple them. They can break their branches and cause pathways for decay. And they can also steal away resources. So they'll root and steal away the water that you're trying to give your tree and the sunlight by covering up the leaves. So vines are really, really dangerous if they're allowed to establish. It's really important to make sure you clear those in the summertime so that your tree has a nice, healthy space to grow. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Zach, little ping pong for fall.
Yeah, thank you so much. So yeah, we can now start thinking about our fall care. And I tried to make a reference to Game of Thrones here, so hopefully folks get that as well. Winter is coming, right? So in the fall, what we're really trying to do is make sure our trees are ready to go into dormancy, ready to go into the winter season. And I kind of look at this as almost similar general maintenance that might occur in the spring. And not, you won't always have to do both these things in the spring and in the fall. But it's always a good time of year just to remember to look at that. So I again recommend for folks to go back out, rake that mulch back and replace it if need be. And the main reason I recommend this for the fall is if we're in an area that's been landscaped, and as someone who's mowed many acres of grass in my time in various jobs, the mulch is nice, but it can easily get ran into with a mower deck and get spit out and all over the yard. And so you might lose your mulch throughout the growing season as the turf grass around it is being cut. So you might find in the fall when you go back and check on your tree that you actually have to replace it. And maybe it's been pushed up against the base of the tree, again, from maybe activities being mowed a little bit too closely, things like that. I also wanted to mention, I have a nice little saying that I use, which is if no mulch, mow problems, MOW problems. Sometimes we run into issues where if mulch isn't used or it's been totally moved away, well, grass starts to grow up, and then people who are the grounds crews, landscaping crews are trying to get all that grass. So they either bring the string trimmer closer to the base of your tree or the mower deck, which can damage the bark. They run into it and cause issues. Excuse me. So we want to make sure we're replacing that mulch if needed. In the fall, again, that thermal protection, really good going into the colder times of the fall. And then we do want to make sure we continue to water the trees. Gabby did an excellent job talking about the importance of that. When we get into the fall season and temperatures are getting cooler, we can always maybe look at reducing the quantity of water needed, mainly because with cooler temperatures, we get less evaporation, soils hold more moisture. And once the leaves are off our trees, there's not, as much evapotranspiration occurring, right? The leaves aren't on anymore, so they're not soaking up as much water. So you might look at dialing it back, but it's still important to water our trees into the fall. And that's because for them to go into the winter with the healthiest to be in the healthiest state, we want to make sure that they're hydrated, right? They're not going to become desiccated, because trees that haven't been watered enough, or we haven't had enough rainfall in the fall, tend to dry out once we get into the winter months. And if they dry out, right, those branches can become brittle. We end up with some damage. So again, you want the mulch. We want to make sure we're watering still, maybe start to reduce it as we get later into the fall. And again, and this one I would say is more important in the fall maybe than the spring, is replacing, straightening any kind of deer protection or stakes that we might still have on our trees. And for some of you might be thinking, why do we need deer protection? And some of you are very familiar with why we need deer protection. And it's kind of a multitude of reasons. One of the most common things that we see is deer browse. So the deer come along and they eat the bark, the buds, the leaves of our young trees. And a fully grown deer can eat somewhere up to, I've read different figures, but up to about 12 pounds of vegetation in a day. So you multiply that by however many, the herds are massive around here. So that's a lot of vegetation, right? Well, in the fall and as we get into winter, right, vegetation, other forms of vegetation are becoming more scarce. So especially our young trees that are below a certain height, anything below 5 to 6 feet down is prime browse territory. And so if we don't have some sort of caging, whether it's what you see here, metal caging or otherwise, for those lower branches or younger trees, they might get browsed to death or at least set back significantly. And remember, they're going into the winter time. They're not going to be able to regrow. We want to prevent as much damage as possible. The other thing deer love to do is, particularly the males, obviously, is buck rub, right? So as the male deers grow their antlers in the fall, getting ready for the rut, they're covered in velvet and they need to rub that off somewhere. And one of the studies I read was done in Georgia. They found that trees from about 3/4 inch in diameter up to 3.5 and 4 inches in diameter. So, they might be getting around that big or so. That's their prime diameter tree that they'll look for to rub their antlers along. And you may have seen this, anybody that goes hiking, especially if you're a hunter, you're obviously familiar with what buck rub is. Looks like someone scratched or took a knife and scraped a lot of, or sometimes all the living bark off of a young tree. If that happens, especially for the smaller diameter trees, it could kill it in 1 year. If it happens year after year, it could, depending on the diameter of the tree, there might be some living tissue on there, but it creates a massive wound that's not going to really be able to heal well, especially going into winter. So we want to make sure we're putting up this protection to keep those deer at bay. And they are pesky and they are persistent. And then the last thing I'll touch on is that the need to maybe prune back some broken branches. I know Gabby's going to talk about pruning here, so I won't go too in depth, but I always think of, well, we've had mowing and human activity all around the trees probably throughout the summer. So here we are in the fall, maybe mowing is slowed down or stopped. So any damage that's occurred from a mower getting too close or getting caught on the top of the tractor, it's a good time to come and address it. And I will go ahead and ping pong it back to you, Gabby.
All right, cool. So we are into our last season, winter. And so at this point, your leaves have fallen off the trees. You've done all that awesome fall checklist prep work that Zach just went through. And now, it seems like you shouldn't have anything to do, right? No, there's always more to do to help your trees out. So what I would say is the most important tree care task to take care of in the wintertime is structural pruning, especially concerning these young trees that we're planting. So when you think of pruning, you might think of the purpose being just kind of to shrink the size of the tree or to make it less dangerous or something like that. And you might be thinking to yourself, why do I need to prune these tiny trees? If a branch falls off of that, it's not going to hurt anybody, right? Well, the thing about these young trees is they have the branches that they have now, they're going to keep. If they're just going to get bigger if we don't kind of manage them. So what structural pruning does is it sets the tree up for the future so that it's growing in a really sustainable, healthy, strong way so that we can take away some of that risk of broken branches. We can protect people and property that way. And we can prevent these kind of large, unstable limb failures once the tree gets older, that can result in a really big wound in the tree that opens it up to diseases and pests. So it's just a really good kind of low cost when it's young investment to put into your trees that can really have impacts for years and years and years to come. So that said, structural pruning is not just like super intuitive. There is a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. So it's too much to get into tonight. But if you're interested in doing it yourself, I would encourage you to look up some resources. And one of the best ones that I've seen for a layman, one of the most approachable ones, is provided by Arbor Day Foundation, and it's called How to Prune Your Shade Trees. And you can find that online. And there are lots of other resources too. You can also obviously have, contract someone to do it. But I don't know, I think it's interesting. So if you're interested in exploring that yourself, that's a good resource for that. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. All right, so when do you want to prune your trees? So we're already talking about pruning in the winter. Winter is a great time to prune trees because for several reasons, and they're bulleted here, but I'll go through them quickly. So when you prune a tree, its response is always going to be to growth, right? It's going to respond to that trauma by putting out more growth. So when we prune in the winter, it allows that growth to happen in the spring when the tree is already putting out a bunch of new growth, and it's kind of a good natural process for it. It doesn't stress it out too much. This also helps prevent frost damage. So if you prune the tree like in the summer, in the fall, and then it's got this new wound on it, and then we get a sudden cold snap, right? And the tree isn't prepared for that, it can be vulnerable to frost damage because of that newly opened wound. And then because in the wintertime there are less pests and pathogens around, right? They're not as active. It allows, because we're cutting through the skin of the tree anytime we prune it, right? So we are opening up the tree to diseases, just like infections, just like when we cut our skin, right? So when we do this in the wintertime, it helps reduce the risk of the tree getting infected. And it gives it time to kind of heal before spring comes and all the pests and pathogens come back out. And then just a really simple reason, right? The structure is a lot easier to see when the tree doesn't have any leaves on it. So if we're talking about deciduous trees that drop their leaves in the fall, you're going to be able to tell what branches you want to cut and see the structure of the tree a lot more easily in the wintertime. So you want to start pruning your trees when they're about 2 to 3 years after planting. If you see a lot of growth right after they're planted, which we're seeing a lot more now with these really wet, really hot summers, if you see a lot of growth, that timeline might get shortened a little bit, but usually 2 years is a good benchmark for that. And then it's also important when you're thinking of timing of pruning to consider the species. So for example, oak species as well as elms need to be pruned. They can't be pruned in the summertime, like during the growing season, just because of their physiology. So it can, and because, there are diseases and pests that are just like really persistent. So, and they're abundant in the summer months. So if you prune during those months, it's like more likely than not that those trees can get diseased. So it's really important for them to prune in the winter. And there are going to be different considerations with every species. So anytime you're thinking about pruning a tree, I would suggest, do a little bit of background research, a little quick Google search to make sure that it's the right time. Okay, and we can go on to the next slide. Okay, so this one I'll go through quickly. These concerns are generally more for mature trees, but they can sometimes still affect younger trees. So damage from winter storms, if we have like an ice storm or a really wet snowstorm, sometimes the branches on trees get really weighed down and then they snap off, right? They break off. And that can be obviously very dangerous, but also really detrimental to the tree. Just like I was mentioning before, it can cause a rip, a tear, and an unclean cut on the tree. And if a breakage or a cut exists on the tree that isn't conducive to the tree healing, it's not like a correct cut, then the tree is open to diseases and pests, right? So we want to, if that happens, if we see like breakage on a tree after a winter storm, we just want to prune that broken branch back so that it's got a healthier cut and it can more easily compartmentalize and keel over. And then sometimes you see damage from road salts, not this winter, right? Because we didn't have any snow, but if we have a year with a lot of snow, a lot of precipitation, a lot of ice, you can see from, the road salts being put down to make our roads safer, there can a lot of times be kind of collateral damage to the foliage on the side of the road. So, and that trees are just as susceptible as any other plant to that. So there's not much we can really do when soil or foliage is damaged by salt, but flushing the soil with water in the fall before the winter season can help, as well as adding gypsum soil amendments to your mulch, to your soil around the trees can also help. And next slide. I think this is our last one. So a big question, that I get from a lot of people that we planted for is, well, what do I do if the tree dies? Like, I did everything you told me. I mulched it, I watered it, I pruned it, I prayed for it, and it died. Well, what do I do then? Well, first thing is make sure it's dead. So because like I mentioned before, we're transplanting these trees when they're sizable, kind of, to plant a tree, it's a big tree. So they go through a lot of transplant shock, and it's actually very common for trees of this size to take several seasons to get kind of back on their feet and get established. So it's not uncommon to see things like, fewer leaves than you would expect, or the leaves turning brown early or dropping early, or the tree struggling. So most important then is to make sure you're watering and you're mulching and you're taking care of your trees. But if all of that's happening and you're still not sure, you think it's not doing well, you can perform what's called a scratch test. And it's really simple. It's basically just what it sounds like. You scratch back the bark on part of the tree, and if the flesh, the wood underneath is green, like in the picture on the left here, your tree is still alive. So even if it doesn't have leaves, even if it looks like it's struggling, it's still alive, and there's a chance that it will rebound, a decent chance that it will rebound. If you perform that scratch test and you see more of what's on the right here, that brown under the tree, then under the bark, then yeah, your tree is dead. And the nice thing about the program that we're working with here, the Trees for Sacred Places, is that if that happens to your tree and we planted it, if that happens within 2 years of the planting date, we'll replace it. So we are really invested in making sure that you get healthy trees that benefit your properties and your communities and your congregations. So if those trees don't make it in that first 2 years, we will come back and replace them. So not to worry. All right, and I think that is it for me. So I'm going to hand it over to Phil.
And
Yes.
thank you. Oh, I'm so sorry, Phil. I just wanted to thank Gabby and Zach real quickly again for all the knowledge. It's deeply appreciated. And I did want to quickly introduce you, Phil. I mean, you're kind of our key component to how successful this program's been with all of your outreach and communications to the congregation. So again, we thank you for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to you sharing with the audience your role in this program and what you're doing to help promote it. So yes, please, the floor is yours, and welcome, Phil Downey.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, why am I here? I don't know anything about tree maintenance. I'm kind of the front end guy, but Sarah asked me to share my experience, and I'm happy to do that. So I'm Phil Downey. I'm a volunteer leader for the Laudato Trees team. So I'm also a parishioner at St. Matthew's Cathedral in DC. And I'm an old retired guy for the last 4 years. And I've been active in the Archdiocesan Care for Creation Committee in DC. And I'm a huge fan and supporter of Interfaith Partners. I met Jody Rose years ago when we were having these endless meetings about what we should do. And she's become a friend, and I love Interfaith Partners and Sarah and the whole team there. So a big hello to all the tree lovers out there. And a little bit more about me. I mean, I got involved in the environmental movement many years ago, and I became very excited when Pope Francis released Laudato Si, and you can go to the next slide, which was the encyclical on care for creation back in 2015. I'm not going to read these quotes, but it really, I think, was a source of great inspiration for me to kind of put this whole philosophy of ecological conversion together. And, the two main things is that we can all cooperate as instruments of God for care of creation. We're each in our own place, in our own time, and every day we can make a difference. So the other big message for me was, as a grandparent, is that we're leaving this world to future generations. And it's a gift that we received freely, and we want to pass that gift on to the next generation in hopefully good health. So we're very challenged, as you know, to do that. And so that was a real motivating force for me. And then you can go to the next slide. Just a couple more points. We're called to an ecological conversion, which for me is a great way to think about it. Planting some trees is a real step in that path. The act of planting a tree is an act of hope, and it's an act of commitment, to a future generation. And we know the tree can make a difference. It can help heal our atmosphere, and we trust that it will grow and become strong. So once we go through and physically do that, I find that congregations and people become, I think, more conscious and aware of other things they can do. Maybe they can address stormwater mitigation. Maybe they can think about solar panels on their roof. What's the next thing that we can do in our ecological conversion? So planting trees can be, I think, a very powerful first step. Then of course there's the whole kind of mystical dimension of the universe and the beauty of nature of which we are a part. And we can see that everywhere around us. So for me, when I step out the door and go walking in my neighborhood and rub a tree or two, I really do feel that. Next slide. I think, one of the reasons I kind of started down this path is that, like you, if you're involved in a church, in a faith community, you're used to having lots of meetings. And so our committee would get together, we would talk about this, we would talk about that, how to organize. And I'm kind of fundamentally a restless soul. And I just needed something concrete, that I could do right now, right here. And I had become aware of Casey just through the local media, and I would see their plantings. I could see trees with Casey tags on them all over the city. I also, since I was involved as an urban planner in my prior career, and I was involved in real estate development, I'm very kind of always looking around. And as I went around, I saw all these churches with all this land, and I thought, geez, a lot of these properties could really use some trees. And there's literally tens of thousands of acres that are controlled by faith institutions, and most can accommodate more trees. And then once I picked up the phone and called Casey, I had this revelation. It's so easy. What's not to like? Casey will come to the site, do a very professional evaluation with folks like Gabby and Liam, who's also on the call. A great team of urban foresters and arborists. They'll drop a plan, present it to the pastor for review and approval. And guess what? Then they'll come and plant the trees and even take care of them for a couple of years and replace them if they die. So it's just, to me, a great opportunity to take that step on the path to ecological conversion. So we kind of kicked it off with Laudato trees. And that's obviously a play on Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. So you can go to the next slide. So we started out with the goal of 1,000 trees, and we've made good progress in 2 years. We planted 600 trees so far, and we've got more lined up for 2023. The first year we were in existence, we were only really operating in DC, through Casey, because Casey's endowment covered Washington, DC fully. And then got together with Jody and said, hey, it would be great if we could really do a similar thing in Maryland counties. Can you help us figure that out? And And she said, yeah, we can. There's the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, there's the Trees for Urban Places program. And so we got together and worked on a grant, which was approved in 2022. And we are waiting for our 2023 grant to be approved. So that was a great success. We were able to move ahead with 150 trees in Prince George's and Montgomery, and we're really looking forward to doing more and expanding in Maryland. Next slide then. So yeah, that just shows where we planted so far. The map's a little bit hard to read, but 35 congregations, 600 trees. Heavy concentration in DC because that was our focus in year one, but you can see how we branched out into Prince George's and Montgomery in 2022, and we'll see more blue dots in Maryland in 2023. So the next slide. So we, one of our key strategic elements all along has really been to focus on urban heat island effect. And this is a very dramatic graphic on the map. And what this shows is an average temperature on an, I believe it's an August afternoon in the city of Washington, D.C. And you can see that there's as much as a 17-degree difference from high to low, low being the blue in Rock Creek Park, and the high being 102 degrees in certain neighborhoods in Northeast DC. So that is the urban heat island, and a big cause of that is lack of tree canopy in those neighborhoods. So we mapped out all the churches and we tagged the ones that were in urban heat island neighborhoods, and we made a point to prioritize and call those congregations out of the box. So it's a real issue in terms of environmental justice that I think we all need to think about and address. I think that's pretty much my message. I think what I've learned, I think what our team did is we really acted as kind of the sales team, if you will. We were the front end people. So we developed a flyer, we would email congregations, we would follow up with persistent phone calls, and the key word being persistent, because pastors are hard to get a hold of, and it's tough getting through to the right person on the telephone or purely through email. And, the persistence really paid off. Sometimes it took, 3 or 4 phone calls. But when we got to the right person that said, free trees, hell yes, come on, let's do it. It really kind of took off. So, that was a key learning. Really, I think we just had kind of a situation of amazing grace, I think, and answered prayers. I think it's just been a tremendous experience for me personally. I just had a whole lot of fun with it. I've met a lot of great people, the team at IPC, the team at Casey, a lot of the pastors, and Father Vidal is here with us. He's going to talk next from St. Ignatius and Prince George's. So it's been a real, I think, affirmation of my faith and the whole idea of just kind of stepping out and doing it. If there's anybody out there in DC or in the Archdiocese of Washington and in the collar counties around DC, and we can help you plant trees, please, put your number in the chat and we'll reach out to you and try and make it happen during our next planting season. I think that's it, Sarah, for my bit. I think I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Phil. Your passion and support for the program continues to grow, and we're just so thankful for all that you do. And next, I would like to introduce our last speaker of the evening. This is Father Vidal, who is a faith leader and the administrator to the historic St. Ignatius Church in Oxon Hill, which is pictured here. This is actually my old elementary school for a couple years, a place that stores many fond memories, and it's where I learned the Lord's Prayer. So it was a privilege to be able to come out. It's where I met Gabby for the first time, and it was just such a wonderful experience. And I'm going to hand the floor to Father so he can speak a little bit more on that.
Thank you, Sarah. Sarah asked me to just talk a little bit about the experience that we've had and maybe ask some of the questions that you may have about how it's worked out for us. Essentially, St. Ignatius is a location where we have two churches from two different dioceses, which causes us a very interesting situation with two congregations that look very different from each other. And programs like this allow us to get to know each other. And so it's been very helpful from that perspective. Phil Downey did contact me some months ago, asked me if we were interested, and I said yes. And so we have a large property. If Sarah, you will let me share my screen, I can show some of the pictures and the planning that we did. First, I'll start with this. Can you all see this? I've got a bunch of. We've got a map or a picture of our facility. I hope you can see that. And if you look at my cursor here, we have the rectory, and we put 3 trees around the rectory. But the reality is, we have if you look at the cemetery, this whole area in the cemetery is no trees at all. And this area, really, we can't put trees in because it's very heavily populated in terms of graves. And this area, we kind of need to leave open because we're not sure if there are some unmarked graves there that we need to leave undisturbed. We have an entrance which has a playing field, if you will, but it's kind of plain. And so we thought that would be an ideal place to put some trees that make the entrance to the church more inviting. And so if you look at this, we've got 1s and 2s there, which are Cersei's kind of, I can't see. Canadenses, okay, that's some kind of Canadian tree, right, Gabby? And then we have this is Tilia Americana, which may mean nothing to you. So the idea is, one is a taller tree and one is a not so tall tree. Can you see this, or do I need to reshare to show you the pictures? You can see them. So this here is the Tilius Americana, which is the taller tree that we're going to have there. And then on to the side, we'll have this smaller tree. And the idea is that we can attract the eye and make it pleasant as a person is coming in. And we've got this smaller tree that's quite beautiful in the spring. And then we'll have the larger tree kind of as a backdrop, if you will, also providing shade as we come into the property. And so those are now planted. Let's see, somewhere I have a picture of that. So this is that area where we've planted, and they're on the inside and outside of the fence for the playground or that play field. So you can see the smaller trees on the outside and the larger trees on the inside. We also had some other areas where we thought we could plant trees just to add to the canopy. And you can see this lower part in the property where we basically were able to put 5 trees. And there it was a matter of just putting trees with the general goal of Lautate Trees team, if you will, to populate that canopy. And so those are all trees that Gabby recommended. By the way, this is the map that Gabby put together. Was you, right, Gabby? I believe. Yes. So Gabby put that together and worked with us. And so that was very, very helpful. And we did go back and forth. We said, well, we don't like that tree. We want this tree. And we were kind of persnickety, and she was probably wish she didn't hear about us anymore. But she put up with us, and eventually she gave us what we were looking for, and everybody's happy. If you look down here to the bottom center of the picture, at the very bottom, you'll see 2 Quercus velos trees. And these trees are, it's hard to see there because it looks like there's plenty of tree there, but we use that because we have a playground that, while it looks like it's got a lot of shade canopy, those trees that you can see around it are all to the side. And it's all wonderful when the sun is on one side, but if it's on the other side, it's a very hot place. So we placed 2 trees. Oh, my picture. I've got the, everybody's in the way. So you can see here's one of the trees on the one edge. And then over here, you can see we've got the other tree. And so the idea hopefully is that on this side, the far side, we'll have a picnic table or 2 and a nice, good shading tree. And then this one will just give shade for when the kids are running around on this side of the playground. And so we're really looking forward to that. By the way, if anybody wants to make a donation to help us fix our fence, we're happy to take it, or labor or money, either one. Let's see. And finally, we just found a spot here behind the parish house where it's kind of dead, if you will. There's nothing there, and we thought that would be a nice place to put a tree that would provide some shade into the building, so that in the hot summer months you don't have that heavy sun coming into those windows and heating everything up. Now it is going to be a challenge to water these. We don't have water. You know, we have a faucet here near these other trees, but still we've got the driveway to cross. We have no water up here at the entrance at all. So we're doing that with 400 foot of hoses that we've got to drag from the parish house all the way out there. And that's going to be a challenge, no doubt. It's funny because when we were walking this, I was thinking, well, we don't want to do the cemetery first because it's too far away from water. Well, surprise, surprise, after we did this all, and I realized that the reality is we tackled the farther trees first. So hopefully our phase 2, when we do add trees to give some shade into the cemetery where we want to add some trees, that we will be experienced with getting water out to them. And really, that's all I've got. And I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has some.
Thank you so much, Father, for sharing your experience with our program. And I'm sure there are quite a few questions. I've just been keeping my eye a little bit on the chat. So, you know, I want to thank all the speakers again. And I would like to kind of open the floor then and allow people to ask some of these questions. Rebecca, is it possible to stop share? And that way we can see everyone that's in the room. And you're welcome to use the chat, or you can raise your hand.
Yeah, so Sarah, there's a bunch of questions that came in, a lot of them centered around watering. So this could go to anyone. There's a question, isn't using a soaker hose around the tree base better than just watering directly from a hose? And then the second part of that question is, what are your thoughts on slow drip water bags to water young trees?
So since I talked everybody's ear off about watering, I can take these. Yeah, so the slower, really, the better. So you know, again, like that kind of high powered, high water pressure from your garden hose that like spreads the mulch around, drills into the soil. That's not good. And it's very fast, but it's not ideal. The best way to water is to water slowly over a period of time. So that's definitely a solid way to go about it. And yeah, a soaker is better than you know, quick and dirty, but any water is good water. So if you've got limited options, do what you can. But yeah, the slower, more allowing more time for the water to percolate into the soil is always going to be better.
Great. Any other questions? There's another question for you, Gabby. Is it possible to have KC Trees fund just the plan for the tree planting? I live in a condo community with aging canopy and need a professional plan, which we could use as a guide for purchasing trees in the coming years. I'm not sure if Casey does that.
So yeah, I'm not aware of any time when we've just done a planting like plan. I don't know where your condo is located, but we are expanding a lot of our planting programs into surrounding counties surrounding DC. So it's possible that we would have, you know, resources to do that kind of planting and planning in the future, but I have yet to hear of a time when we just do the planning. Doesn't mean it's necessarily out of the question, but I've never seen that.
Hello, Gabby. Hi. Yes, I was wondering about watering. For example, when we are preparing a proposal of the project, so we have to consider very important the water, or for example, in some scenarios or in some areas, we don't have any water hose close. So there is another option. So how can?
Yeah. So watering can be a bit of a logistical challenge sometimes. So yeah, just like you said, there are lots of places where water is not readily available. So yeah, I mean, the best option is to have a hose. But if it's, you know, if you're 1,000 feet from the nearest water source and you're just one person trying to water the trees, that's not going to be your best option, right? So you may have seen, we don't use these KC trees because we are able to water in more sustainable ways, but for homeowners, a lot of times gator bags are a really good option. If you can't get a hose out there, gator bags are just kind of a slow drip that you may have seen them. They're like the green plastic bags that you'll see around like young trees sometimes at the base of the tree. Yeah, and they you fill them up with water with a hose, and then you can like take them out. So you could, you know, at wherever there you have a spigot, access to a spigot, you can fill them up with water, and then, you know, throw them in your car in a bin, or you could throw them in a wheelbarrow and take them to the trees, and then you set them up on the trees. And the way they work is they slowly drip the water out. So again, better than no water. We don't usually promote that method just because it's a lot of plastic that we don't want to be putting in the environment if we can help it. They also tend to get eaten up by like lawn equipment, lawn mowers and weed whackers and stuff. So, and they can, if you're not, you have to also then monitor the tree, because young trees have their bark hasn't fully developed yet. So it's not as tough as with older trees. So if that wetness from the bag stays too close on the tree for too long, it can rot the bark of the tree and cause the tree to die. So there are reasons why we don't do that. But again, if it's your last resort and it's the difference between a gator bag or no water at all, gator bag is definitely the better option.
Thanks. And then I know we're at the top of the hour, so we'll take two last questions. One from Jan, and then I see Bonnie has a question as well. So go ahead, Jan, you can just unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm gonna make it as quick as I can. Okay, I saw the scratch on the tree and the bark, and it was brown inside, it was dead. What's the best way of removing a dead tree? And what about the trunk? Young or old tree? And also thinking of watering, doesn't it kind of help when you plant trees? Doesn't that sort of atmospherically attract more moisture, or you get more rain? I mean, rainforests, for instance, more trees better, deforestation bad. And I think that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just so for the tree removal, since again that was my slide. Well, when we come to replace, you can either, because these trees are so young, they're actually relatively easy to remove. So if your tree dies and it's within that warranty period, we can take it out when we replace it. You can also cut it down with a handsaw. It's the trees aren't they aren't so big that they after less than 2 years that they're going to be like a huge project to take down. If you're talking about bigger trees, that's kind of outside of Casey Tree scope. We don't really do that work. That's like more of a Bartlett department where you'll see those guys on bucket trucks and stuff with chainsaws and things like that. But for the trees that we're talking about, those smaller ones, you don't need all of that equipment. And it's usually a pretty straightforward process. In terms of trees attracting water, so yeah, rainforests, right, have lots and lots of water, but it's the climate there that attracts the life that's there. So the climate there makes all those trees grow because there's so much water, right? And yes, you're absolutely right. When we plant trees, we cool the atmosphere, the immediate area as the trees grow, because they create shade and the air can be moister and the air can be cooler, but we have to water those trees first for them to develop. It takes them a long time, right? They've got a long lifespan, and we gotta support them in their young years so that they can cool everything and they can help with water purification and erosion and all that stuff later.
I'm gonna sneak one more thing in, only it's more of a thought. I live in the city. Private property owners taking down trees.
Just one second, Jan. I think Zach was going to answer the second half of your question.
That's okay. It's just a thought for another time. What do you do about? I mean, we've got all these people planting trees right and left and taking care of them, and pruning them, and yet private property owners taking down old or pretty nice trees. Just removing them and putting in grass. That's for another time. Okay, Zach, go ahead, because it's already 8:05 and Bonnie's got something too. All right,
Yeah.
My hand is being lowered by go
Yeah,
ahead.
no worries. I was offering that since Gabby's been answering all the questions. I was going to take one off her plate, but she basically pretty much covered the end of your question. And one of the things I was going to mention outside of that kind of microclimate that you guys have already talked about is when we plant the trees, these young trees, we're at least I find generally we're drying out the soil a bit, because we're digging it up, we're exposing it, especially if we do it a volunteer planting. I did one in the fall and it was so cold that the soil actually wasn't frozen, but the soil we dug out of the hole froze before we got the trees in the ground. And we're exposing it to air so it dries out. So that's where kind of back watering into that becomes really important, because by exposing that soil and then putting it back, we've dried it out a bit. But you're thinking obviously correctly with the whole microclimate thing. But in the forest, we also have competition for moisture with bigger trees. So these young trees could use a bit of help.
My turn.
So I just wanted to point out a couple of things. So thank you for our great speakers and our great partners that have helped us plant trees through the Urban Trees project this past year. And we've, as I said, we've applied for funding again for this year. I know there's a lot of people in our Zoom room tonight that we focus a lot on Casey trees and the Washington area, but the program is available throughout the state of Maryland. So we do have a trees interest form. So even if you're not in the DC area, we are working on partners all over the state so that we can apply for funding down the line. So I don't know if anyone has that form link available. So if you're from a different area, please don't be dissuaded. We do want to hear from you. We want to help you plant trees as well. So just wanted to put that out there. And then I did see a message from my friend Jane from I think it was from St. Thomas, Jane Druce, freaking out, I think, a little there because they planted 200 trees and she just heard about how she's got to give them 20 gallons of water, and she's like, we can't do that. So I just wanted to say there's different guidelines for different sizes of trees too. So what Zach and Gabby were talking about were these larger caliber trees than what was planted on your site. So it really matters what size tree was planted and how much water they're going to need. So you might want to unmute and we can talk about that a little bit. But so a lot of times when we plant the smaller trees, they're planted more densely because we understand that you're going to have some trees die. So that allows for that. So they plant the smaller trees that are just more densely packed together because we know there's going to be some attrition. So I didn't want you totally freaking out about trying to water 200 trees.
You are correct. I was kind of freaking out about that because
I know you were.
When we planted them, they assured us that because, our committee was all saying, well, we're an older, congregation, we're not going to be able to water 200 trees. And they said, oh no, it's okay. Some of them might die, but, rainwater hopefully will take care of them. So I'm very glad that you addressed that. Thank you, Bonnie.
You're welcome, Jane.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bonnie. And I do see a lot of other questions in the chat, so please don't think that they have gone unseen. This is going to be available afterwards, and we will go through and get some answers to the questions. Les, I saw yours as well. So we'll make sure that, we have answers and links and can provide resources for you after this program. I want to be respectful for everyone's time. And thank you for everyone who has stayed on with us after. We are past the hour, but before we close this program, I would like to say a very short and sweet closing prayer. It's a favorite of mine. And I'll give Rebecca one moment, if you don't mind, please, just to reshare the screen so we can just see the prayer. It's perfect to conclude tonight's program. And this is from the Pacific Northwest Coast. This is the Chinook prayer. May all I say and all I think be in harmony with thee. God within me, God beyond me, maker of the trees. So I just want to thank everyone again for spending some time with us, and we will get all the information out to everyone next week. And a big thank you again to the speakers. It was a wonderful program.